the bleeding heart. Mrs. A.D. As the days turned, as she slowly started to rebuild her life, Mrs. Ademola realized that she had been living for her children for so long, she had forgotten how to live for herself. But now, as she looked back on the sacrifices she had made, Mrs. Ademola knew that she had been given a second chance. She had been given the opportunity to rediscover herself, to find her own happiness, and to live her own life. And as she walked through her garden, surrounded by the beauty and wonder of nature, Mrs. Ademola knew that her heart would heal. She knew that she would find happiness again, and that she would learn to love herself, even if her children had abandoned her. As the days turned into weeks, Mrs. Ademola found herself growing stronger and more confident. She started to reconnect with old friends and made new ones at the community center. She even started a small business selling her garden's fresh produce at the local market. But despite her newfound happiness, Mrs. Ademola couldn't shake off the feeling of abandonment by her children. She would often find herself wondering what she had done wrong, why they had left her behind. One day, as she was working in her garden, Mrs. Ademola received an unexpected visit from her eldest son. He looked worn out and tired, and Mrs. Ademola could see the guilt written all over his face. "Mother, I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry for abandoning you. I was wrong to leave you behind, and I realize now that I took you for granted." Mrs. Ademola was taken aback by her son's words. She had never expected him to apologize, to acknowledge his wrongdoing. "Why are you sorry now?" she asked, her voice firm but gentle. "Because I've realized that I was wrong to leave you," he replied. "You sacrificed everything for us, and we repaid you by abandoning you. I'm ashamed of what I did, Mother." Mrs. Ademola looked at her son, and for the first time, she saw him not as the child she had raised, but as a grown man who had made mistakes. And in that moment, she forgave him. "I forgive you, my son," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But I want you to know that I'm happy now. I've found a new sense of purpose, and I'm living my life for myself. I don't need your guilt or your pity. I just need you to be honest with me, and to respect my boundaries." Her son nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will, Mother," he promised. "I'll do better. I'll be better." And as Mrs. Ademola hugged her son tightly, she knew that she had finally found closure. She had forgiven her children for abandoning her, and she had forgiven herself for letting them. She was free now, free to live her life as she saw fit, free to be happy. As the days went by, Mrs. Ademola's son made good on his promise. He visited her regularly, helped her with her garden, and even assisted her with her small business. He introduced his own children to their grandmother, and Mrs. Ademola was overjoyed to have her family back in her life. But Mrs. Ademola's other children were not as quick to make amends. Her eldest daughter was too proud to apologize, and the twins were too busy with their own lives to even visit. Mrs. Ademola was disappointed, but she refused to let their rejection define her. She continued to live her life, to tend to her garden, and to nurture her relationships with those who had chosen to stay by her side. Years went by, and Mrs. Ademola grew old and wise. She never forgot the pain of being abandoned by her children, but she learned to forgive and to move on. One day, as she sat on her porch, surrounded by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Mrs. Ademola realized that she had finally found the happiness and fulfillment she had been searching for all her life. She looked out at the garden she had tended for so many years, and she saw the beauty and wonder of the world. She knew that she had been given a second chance, and she was grateful for it. And as she rocked gently back and forth, surrounded by the people and the things she loved, Mrs. Ademola knew that her heart was no longer bleeding. It was full, it was whole, and it was at peace. The end.